I guess we can just start up. I'll just start talking about my trip a little bit, just because it was so wonderful, and it's something that maybe you might consider doing, uh, um, because it was booked with a crew. I know this guy named Fletcher Tucker for many years, mostly through music. Initially, he runs a label called Gnome Life, and makes kind of real earthy, kind of psychedelic visionary records, some of which are very almost pagany in their kind of orientation to uh, the earth. He lives in Big Sur and is super into like soaking in the whole thing. And he's developed a really interesting way of kind of bringing in like indigenous style ways of relating with the natural world, but doing it in a really low key, kind of friendly, funny way. So it was really an interesting trip. It was called Wild Dharma. And we started out like there was, I think, not, let's see, 11 guests and 3 guides, and started out in Big Sur and hiked east of Big Sur, the coast, up through the Ventana wilderness, through a bunch of different kinds of topography. And then we wound up at Tassajara Zen Center, which is the first Zen center built outside of Japan in the very late 60s by the San Francisco Zen Center. And it's a place I've long wanted to visit, and I just never have. It's in the Visionary State, the book I wrote about Visionary California. But unlike most of the places that I write about in that book, I did not ever get to visit it. So this was just ideal for me. And I'm going to write up the trip a little bit because it was so much fun. And and I also want to send some good energy towards Fletcher, because I think he's doing a really amazing job. So it was kind of like pagan naturalism, where there was a lot of information. There were a lot of people who knew about botanicals and plants and animals and geology, but it was embedded in this kind of relational, what some people call a relational ontology, where really the being is in interbeing. This kind of a Buddhist idea, also an ecological idea, also something that a lot of people say is almost inevitable with deep psychedelic work, where you see the interconnection of everything, or you see the way that you're tied to everything, or that you yourself is made of all of these other forces and people and echoes and places and bodies and structures and technologies. And so it was very deep, but Fletcher had some really clever ways of doing it that were subtle and kind of funny. Like one was, I love learning the names of plants, half of which I forget, but some of which I remember. And then I just kind of keep slowly accreting more and more that I can actually hold on to. And so if you go like, what is that? He'd go, who is that? Like that kind of stuff. And then you'd repeat it. And by the end of the trip, you're just naturally saying it. Or he'd go like looking at some lichen, instead of going, oh, look at that lichen or look at that moss, you'd go, look at those beings. But it wasn't like a whole shtick, like then, oh, now we're in touch with the spirits of the, like it's easy to get kind of new age and cheesy with that stuff, or to be kind of like faux indigenous or whatever. And he just walked this really gentle line that was a lot of fun. Or another example of a really cool practice is that he would gather herbs, plants that we passed during the day, and then we'd make tea at night out of them. So you'd be drinking like the flavors that you'd been smelling all day, with yerba santa and coyote mint and fir and just all these different kind of flavors. So it was kind of like bringing it, and you were like sharing in it. And this really, but again, kind of it wasn't heavy-handed. And then one of the great things they did that was really perfect as a kind of like retreat, really it was a pilgrimage. For me, it was very much a pilgrimage, going through this amazing landscape in California, and then winding up at this Zen center that I'd never been to, that I'd always wanted to see, I'd always wanted to sit in. And one of the great things is that during the day when we were hiking, we would all stretch out, and then there would be one guide at the front, one guy at the bottom, so you could just walk by yourself. So you're just walking by yourself all alone for an hour, and then you regroup for lunch or something like that. So it had this great kind of like accordion like elasticity of like solitude and hanging out with people and learning stuff and just being able to trip out on your own. And it's just I just, for me personally, once I get out there, and I don't know why I do it so infrequently, like I was talking to Tim about it, he's a real outdoors dude, and I just love it. And it was great because well, in a weird way, I thought we were going towards like Tassajara Sahara was the big goal, which in a way it was. But on the last day, just before we got there, we passed by this place that is sacred to the Esalen. And the Esalen are the Indians in that area. That's what the Esalen Institute is named for, although it's spelled differently. I don't think they're a federally recognized tribe. There's no reservation, so they just live in the area. But Fletcher has some connections with them. And there was this place that he was talking about, these caves, and then we came to it, and it was just one of those marvelous places that you want to wind up when you're on mushrooms in the wild, where there's all that sort of wind and water carved round shapes that seem like they're actually ancient architectures, or crafted by fairies, or it was just like very charming. And there were some remarkable plants there that we didn't see in other places. These beautiful little Dudleya succulents, and this one tiny pine tree that looked like a $1,000 bonsai tree, just like these like kind of too magical, like almost like, what is this place? And then Fletcher said, the one thing is the tribe asked that we don't take any pictures. And the idea being, we're like, well, okay, why? Someone was like, why? And it's like, because one of the things that I think Indigenous folks are really sensitive to now is just extraction. That the natural operations of white folk is like, yeah, we'll just take it. We'll just take a picture of it. Hey, we're not messing with it. We're just going to take a picture of it. Then you take it home and you've done your thing and you've gotten something from it, And I've really been sitting with that extractive logic, because it's in our heads, it's in the way we travel often, and I've done traveling like that. I want to go to the place and have the big experience, or go to Goa and trip out on the exoticism of it all. And that's a fine impulse. All cultures travel and enjoy otherness to varying degrees, but there is something really a little insidious about it. And it was a really profound thing to be in a place that everybody really wanted to take pictures of, even though there were very few pictures taken on the trip. I think everyone was really happy to be away from the screen. I didn't even bring my phone, so a whole week without a screen was really a trip, and quite delicious. And then Tassajara was an intense place, man. I mean, it was very lovely weather, which is not the case. Sometimes it's very hot and dusty. Sometimes it's very cold because it's in a narrow valley. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of gnarly fire threat. They've had fires threaten them many times. There's a book about it even called Fire Monks. And you really feel the kind of fragility of the place. But also, man, sitting in that zendo, it was just like, you didn't even have to do anything. You just like sit down and you're like swimming in samadhi. It's like the place is juicy with this stuff. I mean, it's just really very powerful place. And there is something particularly, whatever you want to call it, nature oriented. That was another thing. Fletcher's like, yeah, I don't really like that word. And I know other people who study nature or naturalism or environmentalism who don't use the word. And people talk about the more than human world, the other than human world. But even the more than human world reminds us that our human world is inside of something bigger than that. And that more than human world is, a really important part of not just the aesthetics of Zen, but the attitude of Zen. And, I don't, want to go specifically into it, but I want to read one poem that Fletcher read that I'm also a fan of. Actually, I read two things, something he wrote as well. One of them is from Crazy Cloud. And it says, a bird too chants sutras of salvation, filling the trees with marvelous tones. Forest flowers are like bodhisattvas surrounding the little bird Buddha. Um, and so there's just something really kind of open about that. And what it made me think about, and now I'm going to kind of link it with an essay that I just put out about acid, not talk about it too much. It's on the Burning Shore. It was like my last post. But one thing I've been thinking about is this sort of the difference between turning yourself inside out and exploring the spirit through interconnection and through your sensory experience and through your awareness of the world around you in its multiple dimensions, versus the drive to kind of go inside, which is often to go up. Like we transcend, like, okay, you got to transcend right now. What are you going to do? You're going to close your eyes and go, you know, you're going to, it's like this inward, upward launch. And that's often, you know, and drugs, ask certain kinds of drugs and certain ways of taking drugs will influence that. So if you take a powerful, if you smoke DMT, you know, you just leave. Even if you keep your eyes open, you know, you try to hold, it's just going to like melt. You go woof, and there's this kind of sense of launching. And that's cool. That's valuable. But I think sometimes we get a distorted sense that real spiritual power has to do with transcending or with moving in. Whereas it could be the case that it is just as powerful, just as spiritual, just as sacred, just as metaphysically present to just be in the world, to be without the scales that usually layer a kind of level of projection or manipulation or desire or extraction on top of the world, and really just to be in the world. You know, that if we think about how are our Paleolithic forefathers and mothers, how were they in the world? How did they show up with the greatest presence in the world? Was it to go off and hide in a cave and create a strange ritual that had nothing to do with the world around it? I don't know. Maybe that comes later. Maybe actually where we start is just sitting on the hill while the rest of the 20, 30, 40 people that we're in a band with are you know, making food and raising kids or taking care of the kids. And somebody's got to look out for the saber-toothed tiger. So they're just sitting there. And how do you look for a saber-toothed tiger? Do you look around for the saber-toothed tiger? No, you just create a wide, as open a field of awareness as possible, and you do not sully it with your own bullshit. You stay awake to the space outside, awaiting anything that might happen in that environment. And I'm coming to feel that, especially at this point in the history of the world, the history of human, the debacle of civilization, the situation that we're in, that it's actually really important to almost invert what seem like natural Western models of transcendence that also have to do with inwardness. So then you get into the psychedelic side of it. Well, we see that visibly in the typical organization of a psychedelic therapeutic session, where you lie down in a room, you put on the blindfold, you put on shades, you go inside, maybe you have headphones, and you go in and you close your eyes and you start getting closed eyes visuals, and they'll lead you to wherever you're going to go. And that's wonderful. It's groovy. It's nothing to say anything negative about either that technique, that setup, that structure, or the desire to explore your inner world, your imagination. You know, closed eyes visuals are extraordinary, and you can, it's almost like it's a portal into other spaces and other worlds. but I'm starting to feel like it's just equally awesome, if in a different mode, to really just be sitting by that creek with these trees and those clouds and those birds and those bugs, and to see that, to be in that, to be with that without obstruction, is a kind of extraordinariness that I think we all appreciate. We've all had experiences like that, but I suspect, at least I feel, that in my head there's still this kind of subtle hierarchy. And what I'm interested in is, what if we kind of invert that hierarchy? And this comes around again when one of the things I think that's sort of the unspoken question around a lot of psychedelics now is really like, what is the best way to take psychedelics? Whether or not we see it as sacred or healing or whatever, what's the best way to do it? Oh, you got to have a guide who's really aware, and you need the structure to feel safe, and or you should have a way to be able to go within and not worry about the environment around you. Well, okay, but there's something to be said for being in a place that you trust, but it's still an open place like nature. So for me, it's like the best answer there is going to nature with your friends, ideally with some place you can retreat to that's a little bit more cozy than just sitting on a rock. But if you're just going to sit on a rock, that's still pretty groovy. Have a crew, be able to have an elastic crew where you're be able to go off by yourself, but also come back, have some kind of way of communicating. But really opening up to just being in the space, and maybe even taking smaller doses so you don't just completely get overwhelmed with your own visual hyperproduction, which is sometimes just kind of annoying. In my experience, like, oh God, this again. Calm down, guys. Just let's tune into a different kind of level than the glorious show, which can get a little special effects. And so I think there's some kind of connection here that I'm sort of trying to draw, some sense of what wild Dharma is, that it has to do with being in relation and kind of folding out into what's happening, which ties into some really profound aspects of Buddha Dharma in some ways. And I want to riff on that a little bit, and then I don't know, I might say more now because I have a couple of other ideas. We'll see where we go. But one of the most profound ideas in the Buddha Dharma is that you're really, really not going anywhere. I mean, really, it really is just here. And you're like, no, it can't be. This crummy room with those cracks on the floor and all this dumb work I have to do and the bills on the table. No way. No, it's got to be better than that. And they're like, no, right here. And so much of our spiritual seeking and so much of spiritual culture today, or new age culture, or visionary culture, whatever you want to say, is filled with these sort of the enchantments of visionary other worlds and the attractions of the imagination and the possibilities of this kind of visionary otherness or utopian traces. And again, it's all great. It's wonderful to do that. It's wonderful to produce it, to be parts of festivals, to really imagine and see what the imagination can do, but I don't believe at the expense of that holding out that ordinary mysticism, that the thing that you're really looking for really is right here. And that kind of collapse back into the right here can also be seen as a return to the actual interdependent networks that we're a part of. So rather than just saying, oh yeah, it's just you sitting here in this same old apartment with the same old stack of bills, that's it, get used to it, kid. It's more that you're no longer attempting to go to another realm. Your embrace and affirmation of this realm then extends outward, and the wonder and the transcendence and the magic is all there. It just doesn't look like Harry Potter. It's a different kind of magic. It's an ordinary magic. And I feel that really strongly now. I have a sense of when I'm actually bringing it back is where the magic happens. And this was I was practicing this on the trip, because again, once I'm out there, I'm just like happy as a clam, and I'm not generally a particularly happy person. I'm like, yeah, wow. And like all this, the odors and the flowers are smiling at me and the vistas. And it's just like, I'm just like, I get intoxicated. But when I get intoxicated, same thing with like music. If I'm a little stoned, I go see a great symphony, I have to watch myself because I get so into it that once I have this kind of intoxicated energy, what I do with my mind is I start to vision. I start to plan. I have projects. I think about people I know. Oh, we can do this thing, and like, you know, and we'll do this other trip. And it feels so creative and so marvelous. And this time, it happened a lot. As soon as I saw I was doing that, I would just go back into the body, back into the sensation of the place, back into the foot landing and the foot. And then I would get in these states sometimes. It's kind of hard to describe. It has something to do with allowing the quality of emptiness that is talked about in so many Buddhist texts to really permeate your ordinary sensory experience, which is that it's just the ordinary, you know, it's just the ordinary world. Your feet are in the boots, which are going down the, you know, on the rock, and the pole is hitting the rock, and you're smelling something, and it's just that, except the way I would describe it is that there's nothing behind it. There's no evident substance. There's just the arising of the occasion of putting your foot forward, putting the next foot forward, thing coming down. It's like, and then it's like magic. It all works. It all fits together. It's all flowing, but it's not because it's just there in some simple way. You know, if it's just there in some simple way, no big deal. But if it's just everything arising, you know, you describe that, is that just a subjective perception? Is that an insight? I don't really know, but I do know that it resonates a lot with aspects of meditation and aspects of psychedelics, when seemingly material objects begin to sort of resonate and melt into vibratory qualities. Is that just a projection? Is that something that's happening in the nervous system of the brain? I don't know, but it's just as likely to say that actually it's our ordinary perception that's full of projection. The projection being all that stuff is out there and it's real and it's there. It's like just there. That pot of plant is just a thing that's there. I can go up there no matter what direction I press, it's there. No big deal. But how much of that is actually also a kind of construction? And that if we're more honest with the actual phenomenology of the situation, it's more that things are just constantly arising and they have a certain pattern to them, and the patterns persist. So whether or not that's I'm not claiming any kind of like grand insight with this, but it did really remind me that intoxicating energy, which is again, you know, partly why we take drugs, just for both for inspirational reasons, and for pleasure, and for just a magnification of phenomenal experience, that there's a way to channel the energies raised into ordinary perception in a way that's very interesting. And at the far end of which is something like the perception of the world just as it is. Here we are. Maybe you get to be on a path in the mountains. Maybe you're walking down the street, but suddenly it's not the same anymore. There's something different. There's a lightness or a playfulness or a clarity that is imbued with that. And that, I think, is tied with something else that I just read in a particularly wonderful book on Mahamudra, and I'm gonna have to go grab my my iPad to remember the name of it. I think it's like called Mind at Ease. But there was a line in it that really struck me, that it kind of relates to all these things that I've been talking about this evening, which is that the mind of awake awareness, that in meditation, there's many things to seek for in meditation, but one of the things we're going for is a undistracted, non-discursive mind of awake awareness. But that mind is in your awareness field right now. It's not somewhere else. It's not something that has to be produced. It's not something that you have to radically change your mind as it is to touch. It's actually here, really here now, in the way that if you were able to, and this is partly faith, it's partly based on experience, but it's partly based on the way teachings are coming together for me. So you could say, well, that's just a belief. Okay. But based on experiences that I've had, including psychedelic experiences, I'm thinking of one, acid grok of the natural landscape in particular, is that, oh, this is what awake awareness is. Oh, it's that. Oh, it's that. It's recognition. It's not like replacement. It's something that's always there. And so if you really take that seriously, then it does kind of shift what you're doing. It's even if a lot of the time you're like dealing with distracting thoughts or conflicting emotions or, pains in the body or all the sort of junk that comes up, glorious junk that comes up in meditation. It's not like, oh, I'm just in this thing and at this thing and where I want to go is all the way over there. It's like the being that is undergoing that, or the perception, the awareness of all of that stuff, the pain, the conflicting emotion, the awareness of that is already intermingled or even at one with this awake awareness. So we're already kind of in it. So then that's more reason you don't have to go anywhere, and you certainly, I don't think, have to go into some religious, mystical other world. It's fun, maybe you want to, great. It's like, I love that stuff. I love visionary literature and, voyages to other worlds and science fiction. And I think, and I take science fiction as kind of spiritual literature in a lot of ways. I don't just see it as, some dude just making stuff up. But it almost feels like the access to that in a non-escapist way has to kind of come through this ordinary mind or this ordinary kind of awareness. And then I'll throw one final idea out there, and then we'll try. I was thinking about what to do for the sitting, and it's, it'll be experimental, like a lot of the things we do here, and it's kind of inspired by these thoughts and some Mahamudra practices that I've been doing recently, and Katie as well. Thanks, Mr. Mays, the marvelous librarian, helped us out with the Mahamudra book. It is really excellent, one of the better meditation books I've read in a long time. But the final thought I had about, I think about this sort of psychedelic pagan Buddhism thing a lot. Like that's kind of the matrix for me. I have a little Christ in there as well, but that's kind of a different story. But it's not reduced to those, but that's kind of the trilogy. But one of the tensions that I've always kind of wrestled with is that there's a lot of Buddhism that's just going to tell you that it's all an illusion, right? It's all an illusion. It's like a soap bubble. It's like literally a magic show. It's like an illusion. It's like a reflection. And how does that become reconciled with the not just ethical, but ontological call to overcome merely human obsessions and encounter the more than human world? which we could call a kind of pagan influence in my language, or an eco-pagan, where part of what you're doing as your sacred practice is to get out of the self, get out of the human loops, and be able to actually be there with the call of the canyon wren, with the enormous amount of poison oak that was on this path that forced you to stay awake. You could not space out because there was so much poison oak. That kind of acknowledgement of non-human others, in our normal Western scientific mode, we reduce them to machines or to raw materials or to DNA scripts. That's already what we do, is we reduce the natural world to something kind of thin without much of a ethical substance. And part of this pagan impulse is say, no, the canyon wren is as much a part of the whole thing as you are, or that kind of affirmation of all of the beings that make up the planetary story, let alone the cosmic beings. So I find that there can be a tension between the side of Buddhism and to some degree psychedelics, that it's all an illusion, it's a projection, it's a phantom show, and the sense of connecting ever more deeply with the actual others that inhabit our space, the more than human world. And I'm like, how do those things go together? I mean, if it's an illusion, isn't that an illusion too? Are you saying it's only the humans? No, they're not. The Buddhists aren't saying that. They're saying the whole thing is an illusion. So how do those things go together? And I don't think there's a particularly easy answer. And it's definitely the case that at least some modern Western Buddhists I know can get kind of detached through their it's all an illusion approach. And I don't think that's particularly healthy. But what I kind of came to a little bit is that the experiences of emptiness that lead to claims like it's all an illusion or it's more like a magic show can have the effect of really just getting our stories, our scripts, our programming out of the way, so that an encounter with the unknown other is just more available. So it's not that, it's like the perception of illusion, the perception of the fragility of our understanding of reality allows us to go more deeply into the network of others and otherness. And this is a big theme in high weirdness. It was one of the things that I was saying, that psychedelics can help us get outside, get to what there's a French philosopher named Merissu who calls it the great outdoors, which is the idea that there is something outside of our human cage. And the problem with it's just an illusion is that it kind of relieves you of the responsibility, or maybe even the attempt, to connect with, encounter, even in a way that's inevitably going to fall short, with that non-human or more than human world. So those two things that sometimes seem kind of diametrically opposed to me, at least in the luxuriant, freed from the phone intoxication of hiking to Tassajara through the mountains with relatively pleasant weather, it became very clear that that sense of emptiness is not different than the sense of presence of the non-human beings around you, and that they're not antithetical, or they don't have to be, antithetical. So those are a lot of ideas that riffing on my experience there, and some stuff on this essay that I wrote, but I didn't talk too much about that in the essay, but it was things I was thinking about in terms of how we approach the sacred in psychedelics. So lots of ideas there. Let's do a sit, and then we can chat. So I encourage you all to close the camera. You don't have to, but turn away from the screen. Ultimately, I think our meditations should be able to absorb the screen, but it's tricky. There's something very lively there. So I want to do something a little different here. I want you all to keep your eyes as open as is comfortable. And perhaps if you have the choice, orient yourself towards something towards a view of your room or out the window, or something that's going to be supportive for keeping your eyes open. So maybe something that's not too busy. You don't want to be staring at a bookshelf with all the titles of the books. That's going to be pretty distracting. But something that has maybe things you care for, or it's a simpler visual field, or it's outside a window or something like that. And sometimes I find it hard to keep my eyes fully open. So if you have your way of keeping your eyes open, don't worry about it. Even if they get kind of heavy lidded and not too much visual data comes in, we're going to sort of keep an openness to the visual presence around us. So find a good seat. If you're sitting on a chair, try not to lean back on the back of the chair, but sit on the edge so that your spine is free. And as always, I like to note the basics of the posture, where your hips are slightly rolling forward. So there's a nice curve in your lower back. Helps to have your butt a little higher than your knees in order to produce this. But even if you just set yourself right on the edge of a chair, you can get that effect. Sometimes you might have to come back and slightly open that space up again in the midst of a meditation. And then your chest is open gently. There's a slight hollow between your shoulder blades, as if your shoulder blades are rolling down the back as the chest slightly rises. A sense of openness in the heart, a kind of tenderness. And then the chin slightly tucked so that the back of your head rises and your neck expands, back of the neck expands, an openness there. And if all this is a little bit much, the effect you're really trying to get is the sense of your spine being upright and relaxed, almost as if you were carrying a tower of blocks, and you were finding just the right angle to make sure all the blocks were on top of one another in a nice, gentle, stable posture. One final way of playing with that is to take very small circles of your upper spine and sort of explore where is the perfect place to settle. And there is no perfect place. We're always moving. And that's something you can return to, or may happen spontaneously in the meditation, is to find your seat again, find your posture again. Even the subtlest movements can help make a difference in this body-mind interdependent practice. Don't worry about your eyes too much for now. It can be frustrating if they're grabbing things and then you resist that, and try to just leave them alone for the moment. Open, half open, just allowing light to come inside, allowing the impressions of whatever objects are in front of you just to be there. And for now, let's concentrate on the breath. Do it your way, if there's a place you like to focus on, if you like to focus on the whole breath, if you enjoy the kind of Dantian practice we've been doing off and on for in the circle, where you allow your attention to rest kind of at the below the belly, behind the navel, that's fine. But I'm just going to shut up here for a few minutes, and so we can all enter into that space of breath. As you settle into the breath, try to make room both for the breath, how it's manifesting, its story, its qualities, but also to make space for that awareness that recognizes that. Not in a strictly dualistic way, but allow for some of that sense of present awareness to accompany the unfolding of the breath. Recall for a moment the notion I floated earlier that the mind of awake awareness that we are inviting is already present in your moment-to-moment experience. It's like a flavor hidden in the stew, or a particular overtone of a very complex chord. Which means that whatever comes up, you're already there. And that sense of awareness, spacious, clear, open, accompanies the encounter with the breath. Thoughts will no doubt arise, but rather than see them as distractions that must be dropped, slightly shift the focus again towards this sense of awareness that recognizes the thoughts. And if you still need to drop them, go ahead, but you might find that they drop off of themselves. I mean, our goal is still to not be overrun with thought upon thought, with chains of associations. And any way you can help encourage that is fine. But there's a sense in which if you are connected with that awake awareness that is already there, it doesn't matter quite as much. So play with that a little as we continue on the breath for a few more minutes. Another way of practicing with distractions, let's say traffic or dogs barking, is you really don't want to have the impulse to push them away so that you can stay in your bubble of concentration. The mind that recognizes the traffic and the dog barking is already awake. Doesn't mean you want to get caught up with it, but it changes the quality of relation. In this way, the sense of continuity and concentration that develops with following the breath can begin to expand to take in whatever's happening. Not exactly losing the breath, but allowing it to be sort of the engine of concentration of an expanding network that includes all of the phenomena that's arising: thoughts, sounds, tastes, memories, images. That's a lot of dimensions. And so what I want to concentrate on is the visual field. Now that you have some concentration, just note the qualities of your visual field. Is it a sense of oneness, like a painting? Are you aware of multiple objects? Are there certain objects in the center of your field that seem to stand alone while the rest merges into a single field? Explore this space using your breath almost like a sort of, gas pedal and brake, where you're able to maintain concentration through the breath, but you're really allowing the visual field to sort of reveal itself. Presence itself. You can gently allow the field of focus to shift, either intentionally or recognize that it may do it on its own. And that as these shifts happen with your physical eyes, there are corresponding qualitative shifts. How do objects appear? Is the field deep? Is it full? Is it empty? If the field grows nebulous, this is a good thing. You may notice the habit of re-clarifying the field. It grows nebulous, fuzzy, vibrational, and there's a mental habit or a visual habit of almost like blinking to make sure it's clear again and things are in their proper place. That's fine. No reason to resist it, but become very interested in it. if you can or you want to, allow the nebulosity to permeate the field. Note if you have the sense of individual objects dissolving. Maybe the idea of object doesn't make sense. Or maybe other patterns, other kinds of objects come forward. If things get too heady, it gets too abstract, always just go right back to the breath and allow yourself to sink into that juicy presence as a kind of grounding, and then expanding from that into this curious exploration. If you're aware of the various objects before you, see if you can tune into their presence, their beingness in the moment, which in some sense is just your own mind, that overtone of awake awareness that's always there, a kind of feedback of presence. I invite you to open your eyes more widely, maybe blink, maybe slightly move, not to disturb the energy, the field, the focus you have, but to allow objects to show you another side of themselves, to allow the field to unfold and renew. What qualities of presence arise and disappear? How do the one field and the many objects within it play with one another? in a similar way, pick out something that's close to the center of your visual field, and in a very ordinary way, allow yourself to focus on it. Let it articulate itself as its own being, its own thing. And see if you can catch the way that your quality of awareness shifts. Not so much just to bring you back into the ordinary way of looking at objects, that's fine, but see if you can find that thread, that spacious awakening that arises in the recognition and the encounter with this particular object. Once again, you're already there. And now relax the focus once again and allow yourself to take in the broadest field you can. Not straining, but opening. Again, does it flicker as many things or as one thing? Something in between? Can you feel into the way that you, or at least your body, is part of that field? Perhaps you can sense a quality of merging, of melting. And if you do, that's wonderful. And at the same time, clarify that awareness. Don't simply sink into the nebulous. Just rest in it. Know where to go. All right, let's end the meditation there. Maybe blink a few times and then see what seeing is like. Soon we'll shift our gaze back into this peculiar screen.